So my name is Jamilya. I'm part of BlockchainGov research efforts, and together today we're hosting the call together with my colleagues Tara and Sofía. So we would like to share some presentation and maybe I'm going to give a little bit of intro of what this call is, why we invited you all, and basically what do we want to do. So the structure of the call will be the following. So we will share some slides that we prepared for you. We will share some highlights of our research findings, and Tara posted link to the documents in case you haven't checked and want to have a look. Then we will open the floor to discussions, and we'll be happily, we'll try to answer as many questions as we can. But one minor thing, while we'll be presenting, I think it would be better if you could write your questions in the chat, and then we'll open the floor to the question, we'll moderate it, and we'll try to get all the questions answered. So then we'll just try to channel them in a queuing manner. So so whenever, if you have any questions during our talk, please just put them in the chat and we will go back to them later. Okay, let me share my screen with you. Okay, let me know if you can see my screen. You can? Yes. Good, cool, yep. Perfect. So just a little intro to what we are doing here today. As I said, together with my colleagues, we've conducted ethnographic research on Proof of Humanity. We called it Experiment in Democratic DAOing, and we've done the case study and spent the last 6 months analyzing and trying to figure out what was the governance issues that led to basically a forking decision. So a little intro before I actually spoil all of our report findings. Who we are. So we are, as researchers, we're part of BlockchainGov team. BlockchainGov is a 5-year research effort, and it combines different academics, and it's a transdisciplinary research effort and consists of many academics, professional practitioners, and PhD students such as myself, Tara, and Sofía. We personally have different affiliations, and that was one of the reasons why we also felt like we wanted to explore this case. Myself, I'm a researcher at Claris. Sofía was affiliated with Democracy Earth. She was a researcher there. And Tara is an ethnographer. She is not directly affiliated with either of their organizations. However, she has been following the events closely, and she's the one who does her research in ethnography. So BlockchainGov basically focuses on many issues related to governance in the blockchain spaces. And why did we choose Proof of Humanity? First of all, because we as researchers were observing the space closely. Proof of Humanity is one of the biggest human registries, and we thought that, well, this is such an excellent case study. It's a great idea. And since we've personally been involved with different communities, we thought, well, that might be an interesting case to look at, because we are, as researchers, were driven by the idea to find out what are the governance tools that were used and how the choice of governance tools perhaps led to the forking decision and what was preceding to that. So I think we can just give a little intro for people who, on this call maybe not part of the community, although this is the call that we've planned to focus and, gather feedback from community members. Not all people, I assume, are registered humans. So just a little backstory. What's the deal with the Proof of Humanity? It all started, again, based on our estimations back in 2016-17, and there were several ideas that were discussed by researchers, some of the very renowned academics and practitioners in blockchain space that were dedicated to the ideas of creation of blockchain-based human registry. And that concept was equally developed and discussed by different organizations. And in the scope of Proof of Humanity case, it was discussed by members of Claris team and Democracy Earth. So the concept development included participation in events, publishing reports and blogs and presentations that eventually led to creation of actually Telegram groups, perhaps more broad discussion of those ideas that led to actual launch of registry, smart contract, and then the project DAO in spring 2021. And that also included the launch of UBI. And I think many of the participants on the call might know about it. Is one of the biggest, I would call, use cases for Proof of Humanity, and the idea that has been broadly discussed by Santiri, that who is today on the call as well, an idea of universal UBI is short for universal basic income, and in regards to people who are registered in Proof of Humanity, the idea, very shortly, was that registered users could receive a certain amount of tokens, and they could use that amount of tokens to basically have like additional income or generate additional income from themselves. So from the launch in spring 2021 to now forking decision in autumn 2022, there were a lot of events, and my colleagues Tara and Sofía would maybe a bit more closely explain what were our findings. And I'm not going to go into detail, unfortunately. I don't have enough time to go into the timeline, but if you're interested, we encourage you to look at it. Again, I'm going to put a disclaimer that we try to capture the most significant events, in our opinion, that relate to the subject matter of our research. However, we do not claim to capture all of the events. So that I think you should take that in mind whenever you're reading it. It's not just absolutely exhaustive list of all the things that happen, only those that we thought would be the most relevant to our research. So, yes, I've already spoiled you. The final decision was to fork. The community has split, and now we're having two different forked versions of Proof of Humanity registry, as you see here on the slide. And my colleagues would talk about what has led to that decision in this process, in this period of time, from basically spring 2021 to autumn 2022. Just a little thing I'm going to add on the research question and theoretical framework. So our research question was, what governance dynamics led to the Proof of Humanity DAO's crisis and decision to fork? And for our theory, for our theoretical framework, we chose a lens of democratic Western liberal approach. And some of the, perhaps people might ask, why did we choose Western liberal democracy to apply that? And the answer to that would be, is just followed the publicly available information, following what we've heard from the members. We saw that the core values and just the project as it was advertised as the first truly democratic, one person, one vote project, it included the values and that we thought, and we saw that they were very closely related to what is defined as Western liberal democratic values. So although we have to say that this term was not defining either of the blog posts, however, the values, the perspective, the vision, that was what we thought was defined in project documents and all of the available information. I think you could, if you have more interest into that, you could take a look at our report and see what theory we're using to basically explain ourselves. And I think I've been talking for quite a lot, so I'm going to give the floor to my colleague Tara, and she will guide you through our findings in a bit more detail. Tara, please.
Cheers. Thank you, Jamilya. So as just explained, we use this framework of Western liberal democracies to try and make sense of all these observations and inputs that we received throughout the past 6 months. The framework, you can read more in the report, but we kind of deduced 6 aspects of Western liberal democracies and tried to then like transfer, okay, how did those 6 aspects that we hear in the theory and the history of that concept, how did those translate to the case of proof of humanity, and what did we see there? So the first aspect that we looked at was the idea of constituting a democracy. Now, in the traditional sense, when we're talking about nation-state democracies, for example, usually the process starts with a demos, so a set of people who are in a specific area that decide they want to be a nation-state or a democracy or whatever. They have some sort of constitutional documents or a constitution that stipulate kind of like the core ideals and principles of that region or that new nations, the right and obligations of the citizens, who's the government, how do we find compromises and across like different opinions and crises, those sorts of things. In the proof of humanity context, however, of course, it's not a nation state sort of example. It was started by 2 leading organizations, at least in the conceptual stance, who both had an interest in digital identity space and digital democracy, yet they're quite different in where they come from, how they're set up, you know, their own visions and that sort of thing. So we mostly had these 2 organizations. We put them here as Democracy Earth and Kleros, who came together to start this project, as well as UBI, the first use case. In that sense, there was no big constitutional document, no big governance setup beyond the idea of one person, one vote with registered users on Snapshot, a forum, and a bunch of Telegram groups. So it was quite minimal governance design, which is totally okay and something that lots of blockchain communities aspire to. However, in the case at hand, we actually argued that it was not just minimal, it was incomplete at that moment, and was one of the reasons that facilitated 2 things. The first thing being that the community was not actually able to find an institutional mechanism to reconcile the differences that kind of grew as the community grew. And the second thing being that there was a kind of a lack of structureness or structure and direction, given the lack of constitution and that sort of thing, which not encouraged, but enabled some informal power dynamics to emerge. And these power dynamics or interest dynamics, whatever you want to call them, particularly seem to center around the distinct visions that these 2 organizations involved in the founding of Proof of Humanity and the DAO kind of embodied. So that was around the aspect of constituting a democracy. If we go to the next slide, the second aspect, as I said, of the 6 that we looked at within Western liberal democratic framework is the idea of a demos or as citizens of a particular nation state or democracy. Usually these citizens are the ones who hold rights and obligations in the constitutions. They're the one who ultimately hold government accountable. They're the ones who constitute government to a certain degree, etc. The case with Proof of Humanity, as I've just said, is obviously the project did not start with the 18,000 users or whatever insane number that are on the registry today. the demos kind of grew as the project was launched, and it grew very rapidly, and it grew quite heterogeneously, meaning that people joined from all over the world. These people joined for many, many different reasons. There are some people that told us, or that we saw, who really valued the idea of UBI as an idea of a more equitable society. There's other people who are really interested in the technological development and civil resistance mechanisms that were going on in Proof of Humanity, one of the first big successful proof of personhood protocols. There's others who were inspired by stuff happening in Argentina preceding Proof of Humanities. There's members who've been affiliated with Kleros, and so on and so forth. So these interests of members joining, and also their backgrounds, are they technically inclined or not, the different languages that people speak, led to this very heterogeneous sort of demos that we see in Proof of Humanity right now. And somehow, and maybe also because of the lack of institutionalized reconciliation mechanisms, this sort of heterogeneity we observed was being perceived as something not so good, and something that sowed some mistrust in the community. So this kind of manifested itself in a lot of interviewees, and also we saw it across blog posts and in different chat groups, people perceiving there to be factions. We didn't find any clear nomenclature of who these factions actually are, but almost everybody perceived that there's somebody else and them, and a difference of opinion. And this this kind of led to a polarization that continues throughout our findings, and is very much also related still to the informal power hierarchies that emerged from the early founding team. Another point that I'd like to make here is that usually in democracies, as I was saying, the kind of governance and voting rights and obligations and whatnot apply only to citizens of a certain nation state. So living in Germany, I cannot go and vote in the US, for example, or be part of that political process in a meaningful way. That's kind of just how it is. The issue, or one of the things that we saw in Proof of Humanity, however, is that even though there was the registry, and obviously only registered users were able to cast votes on Snapshot, there was the option for anybody, even who are not strictly speaking citizens, if you want to call it that, of Proof of Humanity, to partake in very active ways in the governance of the project and the DAO through the forum or the Telegram groups, or all these other digital platforms that mediate governance in this case, as there's no kind of like token gating going on here, which again, the pseudonymity that also went with that increased sort of the mistrust happening within the community. And then maybe to the third point. Exactly, we go towards political deliberation. So what is that? Deliberation is kind of what happens in between decision making. It's like this ongoing process. People deliberate on television and in newspapers. People deliberate in coffee houses and in parks, in small discussion rounds, in Q&As with government officials, and wherever. It's kind of all the stuff that helps you form your opinion to make a decision later on. So political deliberation is really a very important aspect of decision-making within democratic societies or institutions. And in the context of Proof of Humanity, of course, being a digital sort of democratic project, this deliberation is always mediated by online platforms that are used. As I've said before, anybody could join and also do so in a pseudonymous manner, for example, on Telegram and whatnot. This was difficult because people didn't always know who was deliberating with them. And then depending on how these people engaged, it was perceived as trolling or doxing or, just counterproductive deliberation practices that didn't really foster a spirit where people would want to reconcile differences and find compromise. Also, this entire atmosphere and where the deliberation was taking place, I should mention here as well, we've got screenshot, there's so many different Telegram groups happening across Proof of Humanity. This is only a very small snapshot of them. There's obviously also deliberation happening on the forum. Makes it very hard to follow certain conversations and know what is going on, and kind of find compromises amongst large majorities of the constituency. All of this led to something that we are calling an uncompromising, or rather convex deliberation mindset, where issues such as like, what is the most important thing in Proof of Humanity? Is it, or, you know, all of these things are important, but is it about creating more equitable, fair societies and inclusive systems? Or is it about building the most technically robust civil resistant registry for humans? There was, it kind of begun being framed as a matter, it can be either or, it cannot be both, and how do we reconcile across them? So that's kind of the uncompromising aspect that we identified throughout our observations and interviews. And now I'm going to hand over to Sofía to walk you through the next 3 points in our findings.
Can you guys hear me well?
Yeah.
Okay, if I may, I'm going to keep the video off just because my internet is a bit spotty and I don't want to ruin the audio while I speak. So as you can see, what we've been doing is to draw parallels between certain components of Western liberal democracies and the Proof of Humanity DAO. And one of them is what we call the law. Now, in Western liberal democracies, we have primary rules, so rules over conduct, and secondary rules, meaning rules on how to make rules that are binding and apply within their territory or among the citizens. So we wanted to observe how that happened, or how the legislation evolved in the Proof of Humanity DAO, and how that affected the crisis, and prior to that, the polarization of the community. So what we found is that while the rules, the governance rules that the DAO issued were very innovative for this experiment, basically the first experiment in applying liquid democracy in the Ethereum ecosystem, it was partly incomplete and vague. And the reason is tied to one of the previous findings, where we mentioned that the governance design that was initially launched was somehow incomplete, and certain aspects of this were not addressed as time passed by. So for example, one of the things that the DAO didn't necessarily agree on a binding matter, or at the level of a more supreme fundamental type of law that is hard to overrule by a simple majority, is what are the shared values that the community agrees or is converging around? Is it inclusion? Is it innovation? The second point is, for example, who are the citizens of the DAO? Meaning, are these only the people that are registered in the registry, the ones who should be participating in the deliberation, for example? Or is it open to everyone who is enthusiastic about the project, like it de facto happened in the different platforms for deliberation? Another aspect is, for example, what could be the fundamental rights and obligations of the members of the DAO? And we're thinking, for example, making explicit statement about the right, but also the obligation to vote, and the right to freedom of speech, the right to access to information, or the right to renounce your citizenship. All of these concepts that come from Western liberal democracies could have played a great role in preventing some of the issues that, or the heated debates that happen in the DAO. Another aspect has to do with separation of powers and check and balances. So a more clear understanding of what could be, or what were the governing bodies and the governing officials, but more important than that, how these bodies would control each other, so there were no cases of abuse of power. And finally, some sort of process for constitutional amendments. Now, we know that in any organization, let's leave the political aside, assume that everything is political, we have certain rules that should be harder to amend than others, that have a certain level of entrenchment. So what could have been these rules within the Proof of Humanity DAO, and what could be the process to amend them? The second finding is that the rule to make rules, the famous HRP 5, again, very innovative. It contained a phrase that was quite vague. And it is stated that for proposals to pass from phase 1 to phase 2, they needed to gather or garner certain momentum. What happens when we have vagueness within the law is that it can be weaponized. It can be used for the purposes of the so-called law firm, meaning that one faction can interpret momentum in their own benefit and to the detriment of the other faction, so their own proposal passes. So perhaps if this was more clearly stated, it could have prevented let's say the misuse of the legal framework for simply pushing forward a particular political agenda, and could have forced the parties to reconcile more easily. Now we can change the slide. So another component, let's call it that way, is the government. Again, when we think about liberal democracies, we know that we have certain government bodies and officials whose like the activity that they bring forward, it has either to do with executive, the legislative, or the judicial power. And it was very interesting to see how these government bodies and officials actually took place or emerged in the Proof of Humanity DAO. Like we said initially, I mean, in the beginning, there wasn't a clear understanding of what these bodies and officials would be. And then the community actually put a lot of effort into designing an interim body, the so-called mission board. So what happened was that in reality, the Proof of Humanity DAO had something somehow similar to a state's government bodies, whereas the DAO was some sort of the legislative power, the one that had the power to make proposals, and the mission board was somehow of a judiciary that had the power to interpret the laws. The Kleros Humanity Courts, while Kleros was in this case being a service provider, there were also being some sort of a judiciary to adjudicate in cases of profiles being challenged. And then certain staff members from Kleros and other people that were volunteering, they were being volunteered or selected among the community, were also de facto acting like some sort of an executive and more administrative type of power. What happened was that although this wasn't explicitly designed, because of this lack of a complete governance design in the beginning, the same organizations that had a lot of weight in the public opinion of the Proof of Humanity DAO sort of populated the key aspects of decision making. And this is not negative or positive a priori, but it is a fact. So we have many members or leaders or people affiliated with Kleros populating many of these bodies and assuming these positions, and the same goes for, if we can call it DEF/UBI. Again, this is not necessarily negative, but we have to take into consideration that the community was becoming more and more polarized. So the problem was that the DAO lacked some key governing bodies and officials that could have helped reconcile the more extreme faction-leaning views. One aspect was that the DAO in the end never hired its DAO workers. That was an initiative that came up in April 2021, but in the end, it never took place. No one was assigned to these positions. And number two, the DAO also lacked any sort of body to intervene when there were any internal disputes that didn't have to do with the registry per se, but the DAO. And more importantly, there was also no body or official that could be impartial and intervene in cases of abuse of power or poor performance of people that were integrated in the mission board. And this is something that came up a lot, particularly in months prior to the fork in November 2022. We can change the slide. So this is the final component, and with this we will wrap up the presentation and open the floor for discussion. So bear with me for a couple of minutes more. Another aspect, and personally my favorite because it's a very interesting topic, has to do with the governance system and the governance sites of surfaces. So again, Western liberal democracies, as we all know, are representative democracies. And what we mean by governance sites or surfaces can be polling stations or like a literal building where you have the legislative assembly gathering and passing legislation. So we wanted to analyze how that took place in the Proof of Humanity DAO and to what extent it contributed or not to the crisis. What we found out is that the governance sites or surfaces were somehow inadequate. So some of them were relatively inaccessible. For example, the governance forum that plays a key role in everything related to governance was found to be hard to navigate for some members who in the end refrained from using it. And the most utilized platforms such as Telegram and Snapshot are by design perhaps not the best equipped to take the function that they assumed in the DAO. If we think of Telegram, and I know that now the community has organized groups that are more neat and clean using channels and so forth, but Telegram is perhaps not the best tool for a kind of like a mass deliberation because it is not as, again, it's not as tidy as if you were using, for example, Slack or Discord. And if you use it for polls, you cannot ensure one person, one vote. And it has been used for polls, and that might go against the spirit of the DAO itself. And for Snapshot, well, we all know that Snapshot is not necessarily anonymous. And if you can kind of like tie the public address of someone voting on Snapshot to the Proof of Humanity registry, you can actually see how each person votes. And the second finding is that we found out it was a pity that the DAO did not try to dog food or leverage its own technologies for governance sites and surfaces. So it would have been perhaps interesting to create certain token gated spaces for deliberation, meaning spaces where only people that were registering the registry, meaning that had skin in the game, could participate in this type of political deliberations. And we know and understand that not everyone in the community liked or well, has some observations to make about the Claros decentralized dispute resolution system, but the reality is that none of that, no type of decentralized dispute resolution system was implemented for internal issues of the DAO, and maybe that could have been something interesting to avoid the further polarization and crisis. We can go to the next one. So long story short, after this long presentation, what we found is that we believe the key problem in terms of, again, we're talking about governance dynamics and governance design, nothing more than that. This is a sort of descriptive and explanatory report. So what we found that in a way further the community polarization and crisis that led to the fork was that certain key components and mechanisms and procedures that we found in Western liberal democracies were lacking in the Proof of Humanity DAO, although understanding that one cannot extrapolate them directly because these are two different systems, right? They're not necessarily automatically comparable. And more importantly, what our team is seeking to do in the future for anyone who is interested, and by that I mean both parts of both sides of the fork, is to help the community if you're willing to design your constitutions, which we believe to be a key component in preventing situations like this from repeating in the future. And that is it for me.
Thank you so much, Sofía. Yes, so we will now open the floor to comments, feedbacks, questions. Let me see, I'm just going to stop the shared screen. Yeah, I mean, feel free to maybe raise a hand, or if you have anything to comment or any question to ask.
I think Sandy is raising his hand. And
I see that there's Divila. I'm sorry if I'm mispronouncing your name. Please do correct me. I have one raised hand, so please go ahead.
Hello. Hello, madam.
Hello.
Yeah, I registered 1 week before Proof of Humanity, but my profile is still in watching phase.
Okay, so I think just for clarification, in this call, we can't, because we can't guide you through the registration process. And for that, I would advise you to refer to relevant Telegram groups. There are many, as you might have seen in the presentation. So we would welcome any questions that are related to the report, to the findings, to, I don't know, if you have any questions to ask, to perhaps definitions or the theory that we used, anything related to the report. Yeah. Santiago, please go ahead. I see your hand.
Hello, GM, everyone. First of all, I'd like to congratulate you all for the amazing work. I was blown away by the paper, was looking forward to read it. It's a 50-page long paper, very well written, with very interesting methodology, stating plenty of facts across the paper. And I think that to the greatest possible degree that is achievable by the human condition, I found it as a paper with credible neutrality. Let's put it that way. So I'd like to congratulate you all for the amazing work. When we think about, well, at least I'm going to speak for myself, not in representation of Proof of Humanity or anything like that. But when we look at 2022, was obviously a very difficult year for the industry as a whole, not just Proof of Humanity, where the project itself had zero growth. We basically stuck with the same amount of users that we had during 2021. And obviously there was a lot of politics during that second half of the year that led to what I think was a very good decision at the end of the day, which is forking the projects and allowing each part of the community to focus on building. I have to say also from a personal level, productivity, working and stop wasting time with people that are professional trolls that are being paid to disrupt and distract with conversations has been a huge plus after the fork. I hope that both communities went back to developing. I'm following the contracts being built by Kleros. We are doing work in a very different direction, but I think that both of communities were able, thanks to the fork, which was I think at least today, February 2023, a very positive decision. So both sides of the community could go back to work. I think that it's fantastic work that you have dedicated such amount of time of research, interviewing, and making sure you are able to deliver a paper that can hopefully be a good contribution to the state of affairs with governance as a whole in the area of smart contracts and Ethereum. I think that one of the missing things that are probably the elephant in the rooms is the economic aspect of the conflict. Basic rule of thumb for understanding conflicts: follow the money. And there's obviously economic interests at play, regardless of the leadership or the governance mechanisms or the different mediums of communication, which are all different in nature. But I think that it was very bold coming from those of us who started from the very first day Proof of Humanity and work with the community. I think it was a very bold decision to make it a democracy. And what we are analyzing now is, well, how can a democracy over the internet operate? At what kinds of conflicts can address, and what kinds of conflicts we need to think around different things. If we look at how the decisions shaped up the body of law that the democratic DAO of Proof of Humanity uses, we have seen an evolving democracy. But at least one of my favorite humanity improvement proposals, that one of the most rich debates that we had as a community, was with the vote regarding quadratic delegations, because we have an attacker trying to subvert the governance of the DAO with automated delegations. And the community came together and voted twice, going through the normal process, a novel idea in governance, which is quadratic delegations. And in that regard, it's interesting to see a democracy evolve and adapt to different types of challenges that DAO faces. So I think that it has been a vibrant democracy, and it has been able, in many cases, to actually adapt and offer solutions and improvements to the governance itself, other than the policy or parameters of the smart contract. But the economic aspect, I think, is like a big missing component from the paper as a whole. Maybe because it's a much heated conversation. Maybe it's less neutral. But long story short, in Proof of Humanity, this is the view that I sustain and the view that I delivered on DevCon of a population of 18,000 humans. It has 700 rejected humans. Of those 700 rejected humans, 99% of those humans were rejected because they made honest mistakes. They were not rejected because they were attacking the protocol. They were not rejected because they were making a civil attack or using deepfakes. That has led to a lot of distrust to the solution being used for resolving the situation within challenge profiles or profiles that do not meet the criteria of the policy or the protocol. And there's an economic element to that. There's an incentive to challenge profiles because there's a bounty in Ether that successful challengers can get. And we have seen malicious challenging happening with what we call vote challengers, people that with the same account, they vouch for someone only to challenge them later, and other types of tactics that had malice and intent, regardless of the protocol. I'm not judging the organization building these protocols, which I'm actually excited. I saw the announcement of Kleros V2 and the roadmap for 2023, and I'm sure there's so many talented people at Kleros that they will bring good solutions and better incentives to the future of arbitration on chain. But it was this economic element and this sensation of injustice among rejected profiles that has led to, I think, ultimately to a conflict within different views or the two factions that emerged in the community. The other aspect, I think, is you took the view or the framework of Western liberal democracies. I think that's a fantastic framework. I will suggest another framework, which is very common in Argentina, maybe, or in Latin America, might not be so common in other places, which is more of a Marxist framework. And, if we look at the classes of people that had a conflict within these different economic interests, there's obviously two types of classes of users within these communities. There's the developers who get the power to write the law, to set the rules of the smart contract, to understand or to have a much more profound knowledge of the inner workings of this system. And then there's the users, who most of them are newbies, are rookies, are Web3 enthusiasts. Many of Proof of Humanity users actually were first-time users of MetaMask and Web3 tools. And there's a big asymmetry in power between developers and users. It's literally two classes of people where, we could argue there's a group of the bourgeoisie and the proletarians in many regards. I think that if we look at the results of the ongoing votes that we had, another big thing that I think we could research on is just to look at the numbers of the votes. I wish we would see also another critique to the paper. I wish we could see the numbers. Like I did that in my DevCon presentation, statistical numbers of every single vote, or of the factions, of how each side voted. And if we look at the numbers, we actually are gonna see, and especially during the last votes, at least during the last 6 months or so, we're gonna see that the users got a voice thanks to the democratic governance of the DAO, as powerful, if not more powerful sometimes, than the users, than the establishment or the developers. And in my view, that's an extremely successful democracy, because it means that users are able to stand on a similar ground to those that have the privilege to actually write the laws or define the smart contract. And I think that when it's the description of the conflict is relies a bit maybe too heavily on the fact of whether Democracy Earth or Kleros labeling the factions under the names of the organizations behind them. Obviously, there's obviously truth to that, but I think it would have been wiser to understand, who has the right to write the code and who is simply just a user consuming the code. And that's a huge, huge difference in power. And I would suggest that having a much more of a Marxist approach, and I by no means a Marxist myself, but I think that could have been helpful to understand the class conflict within the DAO itself, because there are users with different rights. And the economic element, I think, is also, following the money. I think it's what drives the interest behind a protocol like this. The critique of those of us who distrust Kleros is the fact that we have seen, conflict of interest within the Kleros protocol itself, with cases that happened outside the scope of Proof of Humanity, and we perceive that there's a difference in power between developers and users. I think that I'm very proud of the Proof of Humanity community. I think it's I'm gonna close now my feedback. I'm extremely proud of the fact that we were able to keep, I think by now should be 100 voted decisions democratically, 100 voted decisions. And I've been part of political experiments in the past that try to use technology, like Partido de la Red, and many things we did with Democracy OS back in the day. I have more than 10 years researching this type of technologies, and the fact that we were able, in a very heated conflict with very polarized views, that we were able to make decisions with these systems, the systems that we're building, with resilience, and the systems were able to be resilient enough to absorb this type of conflict and accept the outcomes. I think that's extremely successful of the democratic experiment of Proof of Humanity. And yes, Jamilya, I'm just wanted to contribute those 2 cents. I see many raising hands. So thank you for the time and the opportunity to give this feedback.
Thank you so much. Thank you, first of all, everyone who joined the call. I see hands raised, and thank you, Santi, for your comment. The way I'm going to do it, I'm going to try to queue up to make sure that we have questions answered. And Sofía, please, could you reflect on Santi's comments and questions?
Yeah, so for the sake of saving some time, I will try to be brief. First of all, Santi, thank you for bringing up those points. I agree with everything that you have said, and let me check that I got it right. I think the first one was the point that the paper was missing a part on the economic incentives. What we tried to do is, in the section about the different, sort of like the convex deliberation mindset, we try to be descriptive as to the issues around which the community was not agreeing. And we mentioned, obviously, the issues on the Proof of Humanity registry profile submission policy and the challenge policy and the civil attacks against the registry and so forth, dishonest behavior and more. So this is very tricky because we try to explain what the source of the conflict was. And one of them is that clearly a part of a community had manifested that the policy at the registry was such that it was punishing honest mistakes and creating a process of hyper litigation. But we didn't pronounce ourselves over the issue itself. We didn't make an assessment about this besides what the communities on each side had expressed. I think the reason is because we are mostly focused on the design of let's say on the design of the governance mechanisms, and not so much on what mechanism could bring up more trust or more legitimacy. I think those are very valuable questions. They're more on the normative side. So one could discuss, for example, that imposing such policy in the registry could lead to a diminished view on legitimation about the system itself. One could make that claim, but we found it out of the scope of the report for that reason. But again, I take it, and perhaps we can expand a little bit more on that specific topic. The second point that you were mentioning on the Marxist frameworks to understand what led to the community crisis and the fork. We very briefly, I think it was on the finding around political liberation, we talked about the implicit feudalism that happens in these DAOs and in any sort of like social technological experiment, meaning we have certain figures. We didn't specifically mention the coders, but we have certain figures like admins or owners of platforms, and of course the people that are writing the code that implicitly have much more power than merely the user. And again, since this is descriptive, I think what we try to say is, as a matter of fact, in the beginning, the community could have come up with clauses, provisions to distribute power to the users in a more accentuated way than it happened in reality, which was a more progressive and limited decentralization. So I agree with you that yes, these power structures exist, and there's a lot that can be done about it preemptively in order to avoid a crisis. And we try to summarize it in that paragraph, but one could also expand it, obviously. And in terms, again, I think the last part was about the factions and the question on why we keep on mentioning that it's sort of like Kleros and anti-Kleros, or Kleros versus DEF or UBI, instead of the users against these implicit feudalist spheres. That is the perception that we had. I think that is what we gather from the interviews and what we gather from observing the discussions in the forum, that was more of where the division between the community or inside of the community happened. Because even when we talk about users versus the coders, for example, or the founders, we particularly didn't find, we found that the users disagree among themselves over how they relate to that implicit feudalism. I don't know if I'm making sense. What is to say, we thought that the visions maintained from the two primary organizations were much more preponderant in creating the division. That is not in and of itself a bad element. I don't think that is a bad ending to the experiment, the fact that it worked, if you necessarily had two different visions and two different interests. But we thought that represented better the division. However, we can look into it and add something specifically about that divide in terms of power difference. And yeah, just to finalize, to make it clear, and I had this conversation with someone from the community before, all questions that are of a more normative character, meaning legitimacy and trust, meaning us telling the community whether they did was right or wrong, I think it is valuable, but it's very dangerous. We don't want to be the next colonizers, as researchers telling you what is right and what is wrong. There is a place and time to do that, but we thought, because of the situation, let's first start from a more descriptive perspective and a credible neutrality. But again, thank you for bringing that up, and I do agree personally and professionally with the points you just mentioned. I hope that solves the
Thank you
question.
so much, Sofía. Yes, as I think we've put like our disclaimers on our affiliations first. So as researchers, our aim was to do independent research, and I think our affiliations, I'm working as a researcher in Kleros, Sofía worked as researcher at DF. That gives us some personal maybe perspective, or just based on time involvement, we have been part of communities. However, I think I didn't mention, and I think it's quite important to mention, that our research has also been guided by our thesis director, Primavera De Filippi. She is the director at BlockchainGov, exceptional academic, very renowned in the blockchain space. And of course, we also had our colleagues from MIT University, excellent ethnographer, Professor Ali Rennie and Kelsey Navin. So we've tried to adequately, as much as we could, neutrally analyze and assess the situation. However, it's not our place to perhaps give, any, definitely not any lessons or, maybe even personal, perhaps interpretations. So we tried to tackle it in an academic, scientific way. However, yes, each of us, we have our own opinions, and I think it's completely normal. That what makes collaborative work when we have different people from different even backgrounds and education. I think it's great start of conversation. Santi, thank you so much for kickstarting that. We might want to maybe extend it a little bit for maybe 20 minutes more. So I see hands raised. I hope that I'm correct, but I think Jean had his hand first, and then we will go to Chuy Garcia. Sorry, correct me if I'm mispronouncing your name, please do. And yes, Vera, also you commenting in the chat. Please feel free to raise a hand if you want to maybe voice your comments. Okay, floor to Jean. Please go ahead.
Okay, thanks a lot. I think that the document and the research will be very useful for other communities, and people have been reaching out to me about it and asking well, if it's worth to read it because it's long, but I say that there's no way of following the governance without simplifying too much what happened. So, well, I'm really thankful for it, and for the neutrality as well. I believe it's important. And for me personally, these last couple of years, almost 2 years now, were very illuminating about how governance, how politics can play a part in governance, and how it is difficult to just trust with a minimal try to have a minimal framework and expect everyone to behave well. It's hard, and I believe that's one of the feelings that the people that were designing the DAO when it first started, they did not expect over the situation to get this heated and these conflicts to come up. And also that's one of the reasons why we are trying really hard to make the constitution for Proof of Humanity origin, or Proof of Humanity V2 from the Claro side, to kind of prevent some of the issues that we have found. And I would like to also mention that the community was really, I don't think anyone expected the community to feel so strong about Proof of Humanity, because it created a lot of passionate users, and I believe that's this passion for in many situations it was not it was not. There was kind of a empty direction or where to direct this passion, and this kind of leads to people to form factions, because that's easier to try to fit in some of the visions. And this is something that I hope that we are able to avoid, or to try to resist in these next versions of the governance. And well, one thing I would like to ask is that it's lots of things that I saw in the document. I think that maybe we should have documented that better, so it's easier for anyone for a third party to come and analyze that and give like a neutral perspective. I would like to ask you if there's anything that you recommend us to do to make it well, to make it easier to invite third parties to check what's happening and check the governance processes and give their opinion and their recommendation.
Yeah, Tara, do you want to go and comment on that?
Yeah, sure. So thanks, first of all, for the kind of like positive overall feedback. Very much appreciate it. I can also personally comment on the passion of this community. I'm the only research member who has not been part of the Proof of Humanity DAO before starting this research, and I was kind of overwhelmed almost by how excited and passionate and engaged a lot of people are. So I just want to say to everybody also on this call, I think that's really exceptional in a space where most projects are dealing with a lot of apathy on the community side. Regarding how can we make this more transparent and accessible, I think like there's a growing number, obviously, of researchers in the space, if that's kind of what you're going for. I think it's so to engage with them, I guess we're all happy to point you towards anybody we know in our networks that can support here. I think, though, that there's also a little bit of work that needs to be done if an independent third party wants to understand what is going on here. It's difficult to take written accounts from communities, especially communities in crisis, at face value, right? And it's important then to have kind of, so ideally you have everybody documenting the history and every ongoing significant event. That, of course, is unfeasible, but that a little bit remains, despite the blockchain solving a lot of our problems. No, that remains kind of the human difficulty in all of this. But I think obviously an openness to engaging people from the outside and allowing that sort of also critical feedback in is something that we're really hoping will also help both sides or all of this community going forward, because ultimately it's a really interesting project and people care about it. So obviously it matters. Yeah.
I just want to have one comment more because of what you said, that I hope that people like when they read about Proof of Humanity and well, read the document, that they understand that like many of these efforts are like come from volunteers or people doing like on their spare time, even people at Claros, most of their involvement with Proof of Humanity doesn't come from their actual like job description, and then, for example, for documentation, it's something that takes a lot of time and well, any action, like sometimes it make I believe that an external party might say why this was done in this way. It's kind of broken. It's not the ideal. So, well, maybe that's one of the reasons. Like we are doing the best we can in a lot of ways. So, yeah, thanks.
Thank you so much for your comments, for your question. Okay, so I think I see Luis, you have your hand raised as well, but I think Chuy Garcia was first. So I'm going to give floor to him and then we'll go back to you and then to the comments in the chat, please.
No problem, no problem.
No, thank you, Jamilya. Well, first of all, congratulations and thank you very, very much for the interest that you've shown in our community. It means a lot, especially in times where sometimes talking about Proof of Humanity is disregarded as drama. And I think that there has been a lot of proof about the impact and the importance of our community. So thank you so much for this academic and neutral approach. My question is pretty simple. I was wondering if talking about improvements for the future versions of both sides of the fork, I was wondering if any of you had the time to check out, there were already drafts on each sides for constitution. And I was just wondering if any of you had the chance to read any of these versions, and just if you had any initial thoughts about it. Of course, it's something that can have like a very deep dive eventually, but you know, just like on the superficial level, to call it in a way, see if you had any opinions on the approaches that both communities are doing, and any just tips for improvements. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for your comment. Actually, yes, this is a great point, because Sophia, I think, brought it up as a closing remark on our presentation, and we wanted to highlight it again. I think it also answers perhaps Ning's question in the comment section, is that we would like to, you know, offer support in a way we can in maybe, you know, like further structuring of governance systems through perhaps collaborative work on constitutions. So we are aware that both of the communities want to form their own constitutions and put their own values, the way they see their community work. So we just putting it out there in the public, please feel free to reach out to us. I'm not going to comment, and I don't think any of us we can for now, because as far as I'm aware, none of the constitution have been finalized. So I can't speak on behalf of all the blockchain like broader team, although we would love to continue this conversation and perhaps set up a call. So if you have a draft, just somewhere like a link to it, maybe to share with all the people on the call, please feel free to drop the links to the constitution things, because I know the Claris constitution draft is in the forum. I might be mistaken where we can find the Proof of Humanity open constitution draft. That would be super helpful. And yeah, for now, we can't really comment on, you know, the structure or the contents of that. We will have to take just like our internal time to analyze it, and maybe, you know, that would be a subject matter for different call, but we would be very, very interested in working closely.
I'll post both links in the chat. But
perfect.
Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much. Luis, go ahead. The floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you. I'm gonna be very brief, since we're sure I think we've extended like beyond what I think it was originally planned. Again, like I'm not gonna repeat the great job that everyone has done by having this complex subject matter that is the proof of humanity and its surrounding communities and stakeholders. One very, very precise comments is related about the mechanisms that the DAO had as to last minute or last resource control of governance, and to make decisions that prevented or had kind of conflict resolution within the DAO. We had that. The mission board was an institution that should have worked in a specific way, but for different reasons, it didn't work as intended. And lastly, the final blow was after one particular mission board member was removed. The attempt was to absolutely dissolve that institution, which was the last resource, last barrier of defense in terms of the uncertainty and the lack of proper methodology or normative background surrounding the DAO itself. About I understand, like, again, it's a complex subject of study, trying to grab the whole history and the perceptions of the community throughout the whole DAO history. I understand like the focus on this particular document emphasizes on the events that led to the split. I totally understand that time constraints and the size of information to analyze was hard, but I truly believe that it would be totally awesome and a great addition to that in further versions to expand the scope of the time that was analyzed, because the first months of the DAO and how things were how events develop are crucial to what led to further down the line to reach the height of the conflict that we face later and led to the split. To that, like the HIP8, which I am happen to be an author, I think it's one of the first moments where there's a realization that there is an idea coming from a specific group of people that had over what the DAO should be, and the effort that they put just to block that those efforts to actually prevent, as Santi mentioned before, the loss of funds from innocent people and not real attacks and etc. The other thing is that the document is portraying the side named after Democracy Earth Foundation, which is it's a nomenclature I'm not sure I agree with exactly, but the idea that there is one side that is more a focus on safety, the Kleros side, and the other one is more towards the inclusion. That's a narrative that has been injected systematically, particularly from Kleros sides, just to signify that Kleros sides is the safe one and Democracy Earth will not focus on safety. Safety is prime in both sides. That I wanted to leave it very clear. There isn't a safe side and an inclusion side. That polarization is totally invented, and it's actually, I consider it an attack and a sabotage attempt coming from the ones that intend to inject that narrative. I have other things, but the most interesting thing is, like, I was listening yesterday Primavera's interview in the Blockchain Socialist about their critiques over the network state, and it truly really resonates with the focus that, for example, Kleros wants from a DAO that is different from Kleros, because we need to set that apart. Like, of course, Kleros participated in the foundation of Proof of Humanity DAO, but DAO is with the D of the D of decentralized and A of autonomous. It's a separate entity, and whatever Kleros wants, it's their attempt to influence the DAO, but the sovereignty of Proof of Humanity is prime. And I think that the several attempts to decredit, like loosen the credit of the DAO members, which are the registered humans, from Kleros, and try to see these verticalists, as also Santi mentioned, like a bourgeoisie of like, it's the developers that should lead the way, and the idealistic functioning of an absolutely decentralized, and if you don't like it, you fork away instead of giving voice and try to solve the conflict. It's a really, I think that should be focused. And that's it. I have some more, but I think we're out of time.
Thank you so much. I honestly encourage everyone to go and fill the feedback form in our Google Forms that Tara shared in the comments. We really appreciate your feedback, and perhaps maybe you could explain a little bit more with links to specific pages, and that would be greatly appreciated. So I'm gonna give floor to Sofía to answer your comment, Luis.
First of all, thank you, Luis, for your comments. Before I go there, let me be very clear on this by reading the comments. We will not be allowing any personal attacks among the people participating in this call. So please just keep it civil and appropriate. So I think that is the best use of our time for all of us included. That being said, I will go to your questions, Luis, that are very interested indeed. So the first one on the HIV/AIDS and the role it played in the polarization of the community. I agree. I think that is something that we could be incorporating in the report. As you see, the findings are not necessarily analyzed in the terms of a progression of events. These are more like general conclusions. We don't make necessarily many references on specific episodes or specific times and how that affected a specific finding. But I do think, and I agree with you, the HIV/AIDS, I think you're referring to the one on the number of pixels accepted for the video proof, was a key turning point or a key moment in the community starting to become more and more polarized. And this proposal in itself didn't come from any of the factions. It came, I think you were the author, or you were the author of HIV/AIDS.
Yes.
So
correct on both.
And I totally agree, and I remember when that happened. However, that being said, Sandy and Clement had very different visions on that issue alone, and it is a matter of fact that they were referenced on the public, let's say, the public opinion of many community members, and rightfully so, because they're sort of like this on a personal level. They're charismatic leaders, so they did have an influence on how the community took one side or another. But I think we can make a better job at highlighting that specific moment as a turning point in the community and the division of the minds, as we call it. On the name of the factions, yes, this section is extremely complicated because in the report, because again, we can't say what the factions are, right? Because factions are not like these entities that have an essence of themselves. There's a perception around the factions. So the best job we can do is to compile the ways in which community members refer to the factions. So there are many ways to refer to them and to this two factions that community members have used, including neutral ones. So I wouldn't say it's necessarily Kleros versus DEF or UBI. They have also been Kleros versus anti-Kleros, or even funding organizations versus the rest, right? There's a whole array of ways to refer. There is a whole array of ways to refer to these factions. And I think that is mentioned in the report, and by no means we take one specific way of describing them as the most accurate one. The third point I think is very important. I'm reading Jean saying I supported HIV/AIDS, I believe the factions. Yes, I see what you mean, Jean. I do. Again, we will have to go and revise in line with the digital ethnography that we're doing, and revise what the conversations were at the time. I do think that it set up a movement in motion for the community to start to polarize itself, but that is off the top of my mind. Now we should be able to justify it more concretely if we add it to the report. Back on the question on security versus inclusion. Again, I think it is, so it was very hard to include it in the report for various issues. I think the core component of that finding in the terms of, which is the one referring to the convex mentality, is the community seems to have disagreed over certain particular topics, including the Proof of Humanity registry policy and so forth. I think there are at least 5 named there. We don't say that the people who defended one option or another on each issue, and they promoted themselves as defending security or civil resistance versus inclusion, are in fact, let's say, factually right. Obviously, we know civil resistance is a spectrum, right? It's not an absolute. It's either civil resistant or not. And I don't necessarily believe, and academics won't necessarily agree, that Proof of Humanity is the most civil resistant experimenting proof of personhood protocols. And I don't necessarily, so we're not pronouncing ourselves over whether that is a factually correct thing to say. However, there is a correlation, right? There is a correlation between particularly people who have defended lowering the threshold for challenging profiles with a speech that appeals to being inclusive of people that are making honest mistakes. And the people that have gone against it generally portray themselves as this will be detrimental to this civil resistance of the registry. However, we're not saying this is actually correct. And I think that perhaps that can create confusion, and we can add a note saying we're merely describing what we believe the factions or the people involved in the conflicts have said and how they have identified themselves. Lastly, on the exit. This is very important because our team has done a lot of work on both issues of legitimacy, trust and confidence, and polycentricity. Indeed, what we see is that in these types of systems, let's call them blockchain systems, the possibility of exit is lower. The costs of exit are lower, right? So indeed, many people will promote the idea that if you don't like it, you can exit and fork away. However, we even ourselves, we've come to the conclusion in the legitimacy report, and we can copy paste the link, that in certain cases, even if exit is a possibility, a community needs to foster loyalty for the system to be considered legitimate. So yes, I do believe that certain, and we know, when we have documented that certain members recommended to exit and fork away, we don't necessarily believe that or are saying or implying that that is the best solution to the conflict, let alone the solution that will inspire legitimacy or a sense of legitimacy the most by the people that are partaking in the decision making, or that will then be part of each side of the fork. I hope that replies your questions. I'm sorry that I took so long to address them. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Sofía, and congratulations. Nothing else to add.
Thank you so much. I wanted to add something on that what Sofía has brilliantly summarized. I think, you know, it's not very easy to perhaps try to analyze, gather, and describe something that first of all you're part of, and then something that you care about, and then something that is so you know, personal to so many community members. So we really appreciate positive feedback that we're receiving, and we are very grateful for any comments, feedbacks on how you think certain parts of the report could be improved. One thing I just wanted to comment on the factions, right? In the English version of the report, I think it's page 32, and we're not claiming to call and just define the factions as only those, for example, two groups, the ones that you've mentioned, because I don't think it's our place. And we actually try to list different kind of types of factions that we saw community using just the vocabulary than people were expressing in the interviews. So we don't necessarily personally even may not even agree with such division or naming of those factions, but that's doesn't come from our you know, imagination, let's say. It's something that we've gathered, that we saw. And also I think was quite important because we also mention you know, different factions that are regarded by more neutral members, if we can say so. So then you know, I think it's like in that regard, we try to give this, you know, different versions on different terms that people are using. You may agree or disagree with that. However, that is something that we observed in the space, and we thought that that would be important to include in the report. So, however, if you think that, you know, it still misses certain factions that weren't included, or you know, you think that they weren't perhaps quite inclusive, please feel free to, you know, reach out to us and maybe, you know, explain a little bit more on that. Yeah, that's just my comment on that part. I think we have to close now, unfortunately. Do we have any burning questions that someone perhaps wanted to comment but wasn't given a chance to speak? Okay, I don't see any hands raised. So then I would suggest to close our call, and I want to thank you very, very much, everyone. And we mentioned our senior academic researchers and colleagues, but also we wanted to say very big thank you to Proof of Humanity community itself, because I mean, it was incredibly interesting, and thank you for so many who contributed, who agreed to give us interviews, and even those who joined today at this call. And hopefully we will perhaps continue our collaboration, maybe in the form of constitution building, who knows, but we're very excited and we're very grateful. So thank you so much. Tara, Sofía, do you have any closing remarks?
No, I mean, just thanks for taking the time to check out this report. Thanks for keeping this project going. And also for sharing your feedback and questions with us here. We'll definitely take them into account, and it's very much appreciated.
I have a last comment. We have the call in Spanish. Please let me know if anyone wants to attend to the call in Spanish, because if not, it's my 5 a.m. in the morning, and I love this project, but I also love to speak, and I don't want to be there alone as the only Spanish speaker. But if so, I will see you there, Spanish speakers, by in 5 hours, I guess, or more, 7. Anyway, thank you. Have a great day.
See you tonight.
Thanks, guys. Bye-bye.
Bye.